Thank you to all our listeners for joining. I'm Kate Fishbein. I am joined by my co-host here, Tom Farrell, and we are Amplified Wealth According to Plan. And we're so excited you're here today because we're here to talk about Roth IRA accounts, but in particular, distributions from Roth IRA accounts. Tom, I think a lot of people are under the misconception that any distribution coming out of a Roth IRA is going to be tax-free, right?
Yeah, I think the allure of a Roth IRA is that tax-free, down the road distribution, and no tax on the growth while it's inside the IRA. And I think that's all very surface level. That's what a lot of folks just hear about, right? I have my IRA, and then there's a Roth IRA option, and if I do that, that's after tax dollars, and I'll just take my money out tax-free when I need it.
Right, and that very well might be the case, and hopefully that is the case. But we just want to review some of the criteria around making sure that those distributions are tax-free, and in particular, this 5-year rule. And really, there are 2 5-year rules that you got to pay attention to.
Why would there just be one?
Right, that'd be easy. That'd be easy, and so we want to make sure that we're giving this some time because again, this is could be a big issue for a lot of folks. So Roth IRAs are fantastic vehicles. The earnings can grow tax-free. It's hard to get money inside the Roth IRA, and we're actually going to do another segment on backdoor Roth conversions or contributions, because it can be really difficult to get money into a Roth IRA vehicle, because of that income limit, right?
Right.
So once you get the money inside the Roth IRA vehicle, the earnings grow tax-free. So what does that mean? That could be, money that you get from, your investments via capital gains and or dividends. So you're not going to be taxed in the year that you're receiving those gains or dividends or interest. There aren't any required minimum distributions from a Roth IRA vehicle. So when you turn 73 or 75, when you have a traditional IRA, you would be faced with taking required minimum distributions, which, anything coming out of a traditional IRA is taxed in the year that it's being distributed and could push you up into a higher income bracket and could push you into a higher IRMA bracket. So again, this Roth IRA, it's you don't get that deduction when you're putting in the money, and then it's not taxed when it's coming out. So it's kind of that benefit of again having that Roth IRA, and but that Roth IRA distribution, as long as it's meeting certain criteria, is coming out as tax-free.
Exactly.
So when you have money in a Roth IRA, essentially, when you're thinking about it, there are really only 3 sources that the money can have come from, right? You've got the money that you put in or contributions. You have money that you've converted maybe from a traditional IRA into the Roth IRA, those conversions. And then you have growth that could have happened in that Roth IRA vehicle, right? And that could have been a result from those contributions or those conversions. But essentially those, that growth is kind of a separate category. So you've got contributions, conversions, and earnings are essentially what would make up any money that's in your Roth IRA account. And the good news is you don't have to keep track of kind of what bucket came from where. Well, you kind of have to keep track of, the contributions and stuff. But the IRS essentially tells you what order money comes out of the Roth IRA. So essentially, contributions always come out first, right?
Yeah, you can always get your own money back, your contribution money.
Right, exactly. So contributions come out first of a Roth IRA. So money that you put in. If you put in $5,000 into a Roth IRA, you can get that $5,000 back. That comes out first, even if you have other conversions or earnings, and there's no tax and no penalty, and you don't have to worry about this 5-year rule, which we'll kind of, dive into a little more. So those contributions come out first. Then any money that you've converted, that comes out second. And there's this 5-year rule that we're going to talk about for conversions, but that money comes out second. And so then the third bucket of funds that come out are earnings. So again, that's going to be any growth that might have occurred as a result of maybe investments that you had either from those contributions and or conversions that you held in the Roth IRA account. And those earnings that's going to be subject to what we're calling this 5-year qualified distribution rule. Some folks refer to it as like this 5-year account rule or 5-year forever rule. So let's dig more into these different rules, because I think this is where it really starts to get complicated and individuals get confused. So we're calling that qualified distribution 5-year rule, rule number 1, okay? Because this rule kind of trumps other rules. So this rule states that you must hold your Roth IRA account for at least 5 years and be 59 and a half years of age or older before you can withdraw those earnings tax-free, right? So
Right.
Again, that's a 59 and a half and have held this account for at least 5 years. Okay, so that's this first 5-year rule.
And this is what everybody typically thinks about when they hear Roth IRA, right?
Exactly.
This is so, the general investors out there, when they hear Roth IRA and they hear tax-free distributions down the road, this is that 5-year rule. This rule number 1. In order to get a qualified distribution, you got to meet these stipulations here.
Exactly, and it's not either or; it's and, right? So 5-year, holding period and be 59 and a half years or older. So now if you're 59 and a half years old, but let's say you open an account at 58, a Roth IRA account, and at 60, you're now looking to take a distribution of, earnings from that account. You are over 59 and a half, but you haven't yet met that 5-year rule. So you wouldn't be subject to that early withdrawal penalty of 10%, but your earnings actually would be subject to taxation. So, again, it's you got to be 59 and a half years or older and have held that account for at least 5 years. So in that situation, again, you wouldn't get hit with that 10% penalty if you're over 59 and a half years old, but you haven't held the account for, at least 5 years. So you're going to get hit on tax on that earnings portion alone. So again, It's just that earnings portion. It's not the contributions, because those always come out tax-free and penalty-free.
And it kind of highlights if you just think about the nature of retirement accounts in general, they're really designed to be long-term type of an accounts, right? These are retirement accounts. Think about them in terms of, building up over time during your working years. Because you do need, by the way, you need earned income in order to make contributions to an IRA in the first place. And so, the intention here is to keep the money in, for a period of time before you start taking this out and enjoy the benefits of a potentially tax-free distribution.
Absolutely.
That part makes sense.
Part makes a lot of great sense, because the longer these funds are in there growing tax-free, makes great sense. So ideally, you're not touching them for,
The IRA bubble is a good bubble.
Yes.
Especially a Roth bubble, because it doesn't have to burst when you get to a certain age, like
RMD
a regular
age.
IRA.
Exactly. And just to note, there are some exceptions, to this rule. For example, death, disability, first-time home purchase up to $10,000. So just keep that in mind, right?
Yes.
So, all right. So how do we start this 5-year clock ticking with this rule number 1? So it's essentially the 5-year period for a qualified Roth IRA distribution starts January 1 of the tax year that the Roth IRA account owner funded the Roth IRA account. So let's talk about that for a sec, right? So let's say, it's May of 2025. So if I went to fund a Roth IRA for 2025, even though it's May, my Roth IRA clock would actually start January 1 of 2025 if I were to go and fund a Roth IRA today for the first time. I'm opening up my first Roth IRA and I'm funding it Jan 1, 2025. That 5-year clock started, even though it's already May, right? So you kind of get like a bonus extra 5 months.
That's nice. Yeah, I'll take that.
Little bonus. So let's say we're 2 months ago. Let's say it's April 1st of 2025. Remember, you have until April 15th to fund the Roth IRA for the previous year if you haven't already funded for the previous year, right? So let's say it's April 1st of 2025. and I'm still eligible to make a contribution for tax year 2024 to my Roth IRA. And again, I'm opening up a Roth IRA for the first time, first Roth, super exciting. I can actually fund that as of a 2024 contribution, and the clock starts ticking January 1 of 2024. So you almost get like an extra 16 months,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Getting this clock going.
It's a very generous clock starting rule. Well, I mean, you get two things. You get the January 1 clock start, and then you get this, like you were just describing, right? It's not unusual for folks to, you let the tax year, the calendar year close, right? On 2024. You're doing your taxes, you're getting all your documents together, right? You're running all the numbers, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how much can I fund to my IRA? And typically, a lot of folks do that, the following calendar year for the previous tax year.
It's a nice grace period.
Absolutely. So, it makes a whole lot of sense in terms of people doing their taxes, looking at all the numbers, figuring out, okay, here's how much I want to fund my IRA. And if you do that, then your clock starts, the year prior, which is great.
It's great because you get that extra benefit. The sooner you can get the clock going, the better, right? And I think the one thing I really want to emphasize here too is that, even if you're over 59 and a half, this rule applies. So again, as my earlier example said, you open up that Roth IRA for the first time at 58. You take a distribution at 62 thinking, oh, well, hey, I'm over 59 and a half. This is a Roth IRA. Not so fast, because, you've got to meet that 5-year clock. You wouldn't get hit with the 10% penalty, the early withdrawal penalty in that scenario, but you would still be potentially, would be subject to taxation on the earnings portion that's coming out. So, make sure you're careful. And also just to note, Roth 401ks kind of have different rules. So just a heads up there. And then inherited Roth IRAs, there's also this 5-year rule applies. While there wouldn't be a penalty for taking distributions on an inherited Roth IRA, if that 5-year period had not been met, you would potentially be subject to tax on the earnings portion. And so in that scenario, to be based on that holding period for the 5-year clock is actually based on the decedent's opening up of that Roth IRA.
Right. The original IRA owner's timeline matters.
Exactly. So it's the decedent's, holding period.
I was just going to say, the importance of starting the 5-year clock. Not that we're encouraging, the quickest form of distribution out of a Roth IRA, right? Which would be if you meet these rules for a qualified distribution. That would also mean that your money is not inside the Roth IRA bubble for too long, right? Not the potentially the greatest situation in the world, but could you get it out without any tax if you meet those rules? Yes. But it does bring up it just highlights the importance of when you start that Roth IRA clock timeline. And even if you're not planning on making any distributions anytime soon, things can change in life. And it does bring up the opportunity to try to get that clock started as soon as possible, right? If you're thinking about having any assets in a Roth IRA in terms of your overall financial plan. And so, we'll get into, in another discussion, we'll get into some of the rules that surround contributions to a Roth IRA and the fact that there are income limits on that. And there's ways to get around it. But you could think about potentially getting at least some dollars into a Roth IRA, now, just to get that clock started, right? It could be a very small amount of money. You can put $1,000 in, and that would just be to get that timeline started, even though you may not be, planning on using that money for, anytime soon.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. And also just to clarify a couple things too, right? So once you have any Roth IRA opened, that actually is the starting point. It doesn't mean that, hey, I just opened, I have a Roth IRA account at Fidelity or Schwab, wherever you open that first Roth IRA, that's going to start that 5-year clock. And even if you open up subsequent Roth IRAs, it's still going to fall under the original whenever you opened that first Roth IRA account. That's when that 5-year clock starts. And there isn't a new 5-year clock for every future contribution. Once you've made that, funding, and again, so it's open and funded, you've got to fund it. So once it's funded, any future contributions continue, it's not like there's another clock that starts. You're still falling under that umbrella of having that original Roth IRA account opened and funded. So just to clarify that too, just in case anyone has, one Roth IRA here, one Roth IRA there, just to make sure that that's clear. So that's rule number 1. And then we've got rule number 2, because why would things be easy?
Well, to be fair, we did this one to ourselves.
Well, we did. And you know what? That's a great point, Tom, because maybe we start with kind of the background for maybe why this rule was created. So let's put our traditional IRA hats on for a second, right? When you are taking withdrawals from a traditional IRA before 59 and a half years old, remember there's that 10% withdrawal penalty. So let's say I were to take money out of a traditional IRA, I would have to pay tax on that pre-tax traditional IRA. I'd have to pay tax on that distribution amount plus that 10% withdrawal penalty. So what the IRS was trying to stop individuals from doing was, well, hey, why don't I just do a Roth conversion? I'm still going to pay the tax on that conversion amount. But then if I got it into a Roth IRA vehicle and there wasn't this 10% penalty, I'd be able to skip out of that 10% early withdrawal penalty. So really, this was created to kind of close off that loophole from individuals trying to get money out of a traditional IRA before 59 and a half without paying that 10% early withdrawal penalty.
Right. So if I'm 40 years old
and
I have dollars in a traditional IRA and I choose to convert some of those dollars to a Roth IRA, I'm well under 59 and a half. The conversion is not subject to the 10% penalty. So you could be very, very young, well below age 59 and a half. You can choose to convert dollars. You could be in your 20s and convert dollars, and you don't have to deal with that 10% penalty because it's not a distribution, it's a conversion.
That's a great clarification. Exactly. So this is why this 5-year rule was born. So this 5-year rule, which we're calling the 5-year rule for conversions, is if you convert funds from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA and you're under 59 and a half years old, you must wait 5 years before you can withdraw the converted amount without penalties. And now this rule is an either or. So just like rule number 1 was an and, you have to be 59 and a half years old and have had the account open for 5 years, not 15, 5 years. This is an either or. You have to be either 59 and a half years old or have held the converted amount 5 years to avoid the 10% penalty. So let's dive into this one a little. I think that the one, thing to think about here too is that each conversion has its own separate 5-year clock. So unlike that first one where, you open up the Roth IRA and then all future contributions are under the umbrella of that original contribution and that original tax year, this one, each conversion has its own 5-year clock. So if you do, a conversion in 2024, that conversion clock starts on that amount of money. Right. And then you do a conversion in 2025, the 5-year clock starts on that 2025 money.
And then, and that's something that a lot of investors with IRAs are doing these days. If you just think about Roth conversions, let's say you're retired, but you're not quite at the age where you're subject to required minimum distributions, right? Which is age 73 right now. So if you retire at 65, you got this 8-year window where your income might be a whole lot lower, and you're interested in converting dollars over time, over tax years. To your point, Kate, right?
Yep.
And so you may be doing these, one at a time, year by year by year, before you're subject to RMDs. And we talk to clients about the strategy. And it's really, a client by client situation, just in terms of looking at what the numbers are and stuff like that. But this is something that is important to pay attention to. if you're doing conversions over multiple years.
And as a great point. And also, again, if you're under 59 and a half and you're doing conversions, even if you've had that account open that you're doing conversions into for more than 5 years, this conversion rule again, so this is going to be a separate conversion rule that's going to apply to each of those conversions. So it's kind of, in addition to that 5-year rule. So even if you've had the money open, that Roth IRA account open for 5 years, if you're doing a conversion, you now have to start paying attention to that conversion 5-year clock. So it's kind of in addition.
Yeah.
So, just to complicate things. And then the other little hiccup that I think individuals, can find confusing is that, let's say, you're over 59 and a half, you now don't have to worry about this 5-year conversion rule, but you still got to watch your 5-year account rule, or what we're calling the 5-year qualified distribution rule. So, let's say I'm doing a conversion, let's say I do a conversion at 58. And I'm opening up my Roth IRA account for the first time. I'm aware of this conversion rule, so I wait until 60 to take a distribution, and I'm now distributing, earnings as well as my converted amount. Those earnings, they're not going to pass that rule number 1, where they need to have been held in that Roth IRA. That Roth IRA needs to have been open for 5 years. So you could still be taxed on the earnings portion. While you might not have the penalty, you're still going to be taxed on that earnings portion. So I've named our hypothetical individual here, Riley Rothschild. I thought that was very fitting, since we're talking about Roth IRAs. You didn't laugh.
I love it.
I felt like I had to further explain that. Riley funded a Roth IRA account for the first time 3 years ago. She also did a conversion 2 years ago. So she has this $30,000 Roth IRA, and of this $30,000, $15,000 has been contributions. $10,000 has been a result of the conversion that she had done, and $5,000 of this $30,000 has been a result of growth or earnings into the Roth IRA account. So let's talk about, if she took a $10,000 distribution, how would this impact Riley? So remember, there's this order of distribution from the Roth IRA account, right? And contributions always come out first, then conversions, and then earnings. So if she takes a $10,000 distribution from her $30,000 Roth IRA account, that $10,000 distribution will count against her $15,000 contributions. And remember, contributions you can access anytime, even before 59 and a half, without tax and without penalty. So Riley's $10,000 distribution will come out of the contribution portion, and she will not incur any tax nor penalty, even though she's not 59 and a half years old yet.
Yeah, this is a great example of highlighting this first period of the distribution order for something that might come up in life, right? Something might come up, and you look at your buckets, right, of resources, and this may be a great bucket to take from if something in life comes up and there's no tax consequence. You're keeping track of your contributions. You know how much they are, and then you can follow the rules here and have a tax-free distribution.
Obviously, we want to encourage individuals to keep their money growing in this, incredible vehicle as long as possible. But as you mentioned, life happens, and this could be a potential source of funds in an emergency situation. All right, so then we've got our next example. We've got Riley's still 49. She funded her Roth IRA 6 years ago now, so she's had it open for over 5 years. And she, in this example, didn't do any conversions. So now we have a $30,000 Roth IRA, and it's made up of $15,000 from contributions. And she's had this Roth IRA account open 6 years, and she's experienced some nice growth. She's $15,000 of earnings now. So good job, Riley.
Yeah.
Right? So let's say she takes a $20,000 distribution. So even though she held this Roth IRA account over 5 years, remember she's under 59 and a half years old, right? So let's look at what would happen. So so she's taking a $20,000 distribution. So 15,000 of it is going to count against the contributions and come out tax and penalty free. Remember, she didn't do a conversion in this example, but she did have those nice earnings. So since 15,000 came out of contribution, she's taking a total distribution of 20,000. That leaves 5,000 to come out against the earnings portion. And so remember that rule number one is not either or, it's and. So you have to be 59 and a half years old or meet another exception and have had this account open for at least 5 years. So in this example, even though she's had the Roth IRA account open over 5 years, she's still 49. So she's not meeting that age criteria. So that 5,000 earnings comes out taxed as ordinary income and gets hit with a 10% penalty. So it's a double whammy, Tom.
Yeah. Not great, but at least she gets 15 of the 20 tax free.
Exactly. Yep. Do you want to take us through the next one, or you want me to hop on?
I think you're on a roll.
I'm on a roll. All right. I'll keep going. Riley is still 49. I'm not aging her. Lucky thing. She's timeless. Riley's timeless. So let's say she opened up this Roth IRA account and funded it 8 years ago. She did a conversion 3 years ago. So she has still $30,000 Roth IRA, but now it's comprised of $15,000 from contributions, $10,000 from conversions, and she's done well, but not as well as the previous example. She has $5,000 of earnings. So let's say she needs a $20,000 distribution. So she's 49 years old. Roth IRA has been open 8 years, and she did the conversion 3 years ago. So let's see what happens in this example. So again, contributions, lucky Riley. She's taking a $20,000 distribution out of her $30,000 IRA. Contributions come out first, tax and penalty free, even though she's not 59 and a half. Now, remember, we've got this remaining 5,000 that's going to come out against that conversion portion. So now that 5,000 that comes out against the conversion, remember, that needs to meet that second rule, which is either or. She needs to be either 59 and a half years or older, or have held the converted amount for a minimum of 5 years. And in this example, Riley has not met either of those criteria. So in this example, she's going to be hit with a 10% penalty on the converted amount that comes out. There will not be any tax because remember, when you're doing a Roth conversion, you are paying tax in the year that you do the conversion. So she's already paid tax on those funds in the year that she did the conversion. But in this example where she's taking a distribution of 5,000 against that converted portion, and she's not 59 and a half years old, nor has she held that Roth conversion portion a minimum of 5 years. So she's going to be hit with that 10% penalty, but she will not be taxed on that $5,000. Are you confused yet? This is a lot.
Well, listen, I think this highlights the complexity of the distribution rules. And this is a great example where, lots of folks have contributions in a Roth IRA. They have converted dollars in a Roth IRA. They have those earnings in there. So this is a great way to look at the layers, right? To see, listen, based on your particular situation, if you had to make a distribution, what would be the outcome, right? And so whenever, before you make any financial decision, you want to at least do some legwork up front or plan and figure out, okay, what's the tax consequence of doing X, Y, Z, right? And this is a great example of one, highlighting the complexity, but two, showing, listen, in this particular example, here's the facts and circumstances, and then this is what the outcome would look like for Riley in this conversion scenario.
And the other thing I would like to point out, it's an excellent point, is that, when we're talking about that conversion portion, that would also apply to any backdoor Roth conversion. So it's not just money that you've, convert pre-tax dollars that you've converted from a traditional IRA. It also counts for those after-tax conversions. So even those backdoor Roth conversions will be subject to this conversion stipulation.
Kate, should we have a separate episode about backdoor Roth contributions?
That's a great idea. Let's do that next. Okay, so now I think all of our listeners are ready.
Now we're getting even more complicated.
Let's synthesize. Let's put it all together. Let's do an example where we have conversion money and earnings coming out. So in this example, Riley is still 49 years old. She still opened and funded her Roth IRA for the first time 8 years ago. But this time she did her conversion 6 years ago. Unfortunately, hard times have fallen on Riley. Poor Riley. And she needs to take the full amount of her Roth IRA out. So she's taking a $30,000 distribution from her $30,000 Roth IRA, which is comprised of $15,000 of contributions, $10,000 from the conversion, which was done 6 years ago, and $5,000 from earnings. So let's talk about what happens here. So remember, we're going to have both 5-year rules at play in here. So the $15,000 contribution comes out first and is not taxable. There's no tax, no penalty. So she's got that going for her, right?
That's right.
Now we get to the converted amount. Now remember, $10,000 of her $30,000 was a result of her doing conversions. Now she did this conversion in this example 6 years ago. So remember, any conversions, it's going to be that either or rule. So she has to be either 59 and a half years or older, or have held the converted portion for a minimum of 5 years. And in this example, that she has this $10,000 come out penalty and tax free, because again, she met one of those two criteria. So even though she's not 59 and a half years old, she held that converted area, the converted money, for at least 5 years. So no tax, no penalty. Because remember, she paid the tax on the conversion when she did the conversion. And then she's got this $5,000 in earnings that's going to come out. And that one, remember, is not either or, that one's and. So she has to be 59 and a half years old and have had the account open and funded for a minimum of 5 years. And she is not 59 and a half years or older. Even though she did have the account open for 8 years, she's not meeting that age requirement or another exception in this example. So that $5,000 of earnings is coming out subject to both taxes on that earnings portion and a 10% penalty. So that hurts. But again, she was at least able to access her contributions and her conversion without tax and penalty.
And I would just add that if for anybody who's just listening to this with just audio, we know that we've been going through a lot of different examples here. And if you're a visual learner like I am, we do have slides that Kate put together here that does make this easier to illustrate and see the different pieces that Kate is describing. So you can check that out on YouTube. Go to Amplified Wealth According to Plan, and you can see the details on the slides.
I hope the slides help.
They help me.
All right, good. I think so for our visual learners. All right, and let's talk about our favorite type of Roth IRA, the qualified distribution. So Riley has now age of 62 years. She funded her Roth IRA, open and funded 8 years ago, and she did a conversion 6 years ago. So she still has $30,000 in her Roth IRA, 15 result of contributions, 10,000 from conversions, 5,000 from earnings. And again, she's unfortunately come across hard times and she needs to pull the entire Roth IRA account. So now remember, she's over 59 and a half years old and she meets that 5-year holding period. So let's dig into each one of these items and kind of talk about this example and how they would apply. So contributions come out first, that 15,000, tax and penalty free. That conversion, she did it 6 years ago, but in this example, we're not worried about the converted portion because she's over 59 and a half. And remember that rule number 2 for conversions, it's either or. So 59 and a half years old or have held that converted portion for a minimum of 5 years. So once you turn 59 and a half years old, you don't have to worry about that rule number 2, but you still have to worry about rule number 1 in order the earnings portion is coming out tax-free and penalty-free. Well, it's going to be penalty-free once you're 59 and a half years old, but whether or not it's tax-free, that's where that 5-year rule comes in. So
Right.
portion is going to come out against the earnings, and that because she is 59 and a half and has had this account open for more than 5 years, she does not have to worry about penalty or taxes. So hooray, qualified distribution. So our favorite example.
Yeah, this is what folks are thinking about when it comes to those tax-free distributions, and this is a great example of illustrating a complex Roth IRA situation, but one that does meet that qualified distribution standard.
Exactly. So let's try to sum all this up, because I know this was a lot and a lot of different rules, and so really, you need to watch both 5-year rules. Right. Again, I think there's a misconception out there that all distributions from a Roth IRA are tax-free, but they're not. You got to make sure you're following the rules to make sure that you're maximizing this incredible vehicle and all that it has to offer. So watch that 5-year, what we're calling that rule number 1, that 5-year qualified distribution rule, and remember that's an and. So you must be 59 and a half years old or meet one of those exceptions. And there are more too. You can go to the IRS website. There are other exceptions as well, and have had the Roth IRA account open and funded for at least 5 years to be able to withdraw the earnings portion tax-free. Then you've got to watch that 5-year conversion clock, or what we're calling rule number 2. And remember, that rule is an either or. So you either have to be at least 59 and a half years old or have held that converted amount for a minimum of 5 years to withdraw that conversion penalty free. There isn't any tax because you've already paid tax on the converted amount. But if you did not meet at least one of those criteria, 59 and a half, or have held the converted amount for 5 years, that converted amount that you're distributing would be subject to a 10% penalty. And remember,
yeah, you had a good example of that. Sorry to cut you off there.
Yeah,
you had a good example of that where it could trip somebody up. Where let's say the conversion happened when you were 58, and now you're 60 years old, and you want to make a distribution. You could be thinking about the 5-year period, but don't forget the fact that now you're over 59 and a half. So now that you're 60, right, you don't have to deal with that 10% penalty. So that's just it's one of those areas where you may be thinking about one part of the rule, but just remember what Kate keeps talking about, the either or part of this conversion rule.
Right. And that's really key. And then with that Roth conversion, if you are 59 and a half years old, remember that each converted amount has its own 5-year clock that you need to be mindful of. And that actually, if you were to take out conversions and you had multiple conversions, that actually they come out FIFO. So I guess it's kind of like best case scenario. And what I mean by FIFO is that they come out, each converted amount comes out first in, first out. So whatever your first conversion year. So let's say I were to do a conversion in 2020, and then I did one in 2021. If I took a distribution against conversions from my Roth IRA, that 2020 converted amount would be the first lot to come out. So just keep that in mind too.
That's a good point.
At least a more favorable distribution. Yeah.
Yeah, the rules actually aren't too bad when it comes to just being in, if you want to just think about it as favorable to the taxpayer, especially the fact that the clock starts January 1st, even if you may have contributed much later in the calendar year, or even right before you did your taxes the following year. And the other thing to point out would be on this conversion rule piece of it, that when that clock starts, is a lot of folks are doing these conversions typically later in the calendar year. once they have more information about how much taxable income they have for that particular calendar year.
Very good point. Yeah.
And so you may be doing a Roth conversion. It might be like a partial Roth conversion that may be happening in November, for example. But if you do that in November, the clock starts the previous January, which is very generous. And, a lot of folks aren't doing it earlier in the year because they got rid of that recharacterization provision where you could do the do-over, right? Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
That was actually one of the best provisions in the tax law for IRAs, was the recharacterization rule. But they got rid of that, and now it's there's no do-overs. If you do a conversion, you got to live with it.
Those were the days. You didn't even know you had it so good then, But yeah, I think that's a good point. And that's also a good point too, with conversions, the earliest you can go back if you're doing that conversion in that tax year is Jan 1, right? You're not going back to the previous year. Whenever you do that conversion, it's happening, in that tax year. And, as you were saying earlier, right, Tom, like the best approach, ideally, when you're doing a conversion, or when you're funding a Roth IRA, you're funding that vehicle really for the benefits of the long-term growth have to offer. So I would say the longer you can keep the Roth IRA assets, intact and not taking them ahead of that 5-year window might benefit you over the longer term, getting those assets growing and compounding for future needs, instead of tapping into them. But, life happens and sometimes needs come up. And then, the other thing too, just to be on the lookout for is certainly that, that inherited 5-year rule as well too, right? It kind of falls under that first rule as well, where, even though you have inherited funds, they wouldn't be subject to a penalty, but you've got to watch that 5-year clock based on the descendants. I have not been watching the Disney movie, The Decedents, when they opened the Roth IRA.
Yeah, their time.
They opened the Roth IRA, the decedent, not the descendants, like the Disney movie. When they opened the Roth IRA, that's when that 5-year clock starts. So you could still be subject to, tax on the earnings portion. And again, there are some exceptions, right? And it's always a good idea to review your intentions, with your CPA before taking a big Roth IRA distribution and kind of going over, what the tax implications might be. As we are not tax advisors, and always your CPA, should know your particular situation.
Right. The earlier that conversation can be started with your tax advisor, the better, for sure.
Yep. So hopefully we've clarified some of the really confusing rules about Roth IRAs and the distributions and how they're taxed. We're so excited that you've joined, and thank you so much for tuning in for Amplified Wealth According to Plan. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and we hope to see you back here soon.
Thank you.